This chapter of One Piece was all about Luffy's family on God Valley, and it felt like a movie. The cover page of One Piece chapter 1160, titled The God Valley Incident, features Yamato's return to the Flower Capital alongside the shrine that was built for Odin and his friends. With this, it seems like we may be approaching the end of this particular story. At 42 installments, we are just 6 away from hitting the current record of 48 set by the decks of the World Cover story. But our main story resumes on God Valley. The newly discovered Davy Clan members were presented to the many celestial dragons who hated their guts. And that hatred only grew when they realized that some of them also had Buccaneer blood, which seems to be why some of them are especially big. The nobles began throwing weapons in their outrage and eagerness. The announcer jokingly urged them not to kill the targets too soon. Blackbeard's mother did her best to shield him from harm, but the little boy caught each and every moment with wide eyes. At only 2 years old, this is more than likely a core memory for him. And you know, although this makes me sympathize with Blackbeard to some extent, I can't say totally, just because he still betrayed people who considered him to be family. His mother actually looks a bit like Robin's mom, Nico Olivia. And I'm wondering if this woman is actually a member of the Davy clan or not. It could just be that she didn't want to be separated from her child, so she just accepted the designation. Or you can just become a member of the clan through marriage. We know that Blackbeard was born on Shade Port and not God Valley. So if there is any connection between this woman and Robin's lineage, I'm not so sure it'd be related to the Davy clan as well. Whatever the case, the bloodthirsty Celestials long to exterminate the Davy clan here and now. So yeah, there is just an extreme level of animosity towards the descendants of Davy Jones. The legendary pirate must have been a bigger enemy to their lineage than any pirate since. At the same time, St. J. Garcia Saturn complimented Garling on the remarkable discovery of the clan's whereabouts, which the knight chalked up to the work of fate. And it's funny to know that Garling ended up taking this guy's job decades later. After that, the Celestials announced the favored participants of the individual competition. Elsewhere, a red-haired mother knew that her life was coming to an end. Still, she had one final request. She wanted Shanks and Shamrock to be raised by someone with a kind heart. The woman begged Dragon not to give her kids to their father. And then, she made her departure. Dragon knew that this woman and her children were just strangers to him. Hell, we couldn't even see her face. But even so, he wanted to help. And if he couldn't even do that, then how could he ever claim to stand for justice? There were said to be 150 rare and 13 super rare rabbits scattered about the island. Each of the super rare ones, like Kuma, were worth a whopping 10,000 points, which we already knew thanks to Garling's negative 10,000 points from killing the king of God Valley. With only an hour left before the hunt, the rabbits were told to run and hide while they still could. The sadistic invaders longed for a challenge. And for these unfortunate souls, their best chance would be to survive the allotted 3 weeks. So running and hiding was really all they could do. But obviously, even if they could do the impossible and survive that long, there is no way they'd be allowed to get away after what they'd seen and experienced. And in time, the hunt had officially begun. And boy was it dark. The bull-headed monsters were riding on the backs of large birds, just like Garling was. Hidden behind a rock, a mother prayed that her baby wouldn't cry and reveal their location. But unfortunately, the family was found. The freak who encountered them was delighted and aimed his weapon. The crying parents begged the Celestial to spare their baby. Instead, the monster happily fired 3 shots. This and various scenes like it were being relayed through snails. Some people begged for their lives. Some begged for the lives of others. And some never had a chance to beg in the first place. They were all slaughtered regardless. Over in the Holy Land, these travesties were seen as festivities. It was said that the Figarland family was in the lead. And that was thanks to Garling bringing them up to 100,000 points very quickly, even with that negative 10,000 handicap. but the Bavette and Manmayer families were closely following behind them, so that is yet another noble family added to the list. So far, we have the Figarland family, the Shepherd family, the Don Quixote family, the Roseward family, the Manmayer family, the Rimoshifu family, and now the Bavette family, bringing us up to 7 out of 19. Garling was making short work of anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path, and the hideous Celestial women were in awe of his performance. Two Celestials discussed their bets. One of them expected House Shepherd to win the clan contest, and believed that Gunko would win the solo competition. And I guess this is here to emphasize their presence in this flashback, as of course, they are currently on Elbaf causing trouble. But that was a surprise to the other sicko, who tried to remind him that there is only one God Steel among the knights. But actually, this portion of the translation seems to be off the mark. A more literal translation points to this being a question about Gunko and not another character or insinuating Garling. The distinction being that she isn't a typical member of God's Knights and is instead a vessel or pawn of the Supreme One, who is of course Imu. And the fact that this guy expects Gunko to win over Garling, the leader of God's Knights, just goes to show how capable she truly is. As all the while, Gunko was effortlessly cutting people down and scoring tons of bonus points for House Manmayer. Further away, armed guards were protecting the main prize of the event. One of them expected Garling to win and envied him over his soon-to-be wife. Then again, there was no guarantee that Garling would actually win. And here, Shaki's expression was somber and reserved. Elsewhere, we would have the deplorable scene of Saint Summers kicking a tree that a scared little boy had climbed into. The wretched knight barked with laughter and mockingly toyed with his prey. The terrified child yelled at him to go away, but Summers wasn't going anywhere, and neither were his thorns. Just before the kid totally fell, his father ran out to save him. The man promised the boy that he would catch him, and sadly, they were both caught by the thorns and perished. So win, lose, or draw, Saint Summers was having his fun. While on another front, Monkey D. Dragon encountered a grisly scene. Breathing heavily, he truly believed that helping the red-haired woman would be his act of defiance against the Celestial Dragons. But now, he could barely keep himself from throwing up. His entire platoon had been executed by the monsters. Or at least, that's what this translation would have us believe. But this seems to be another error, as these are clearly civilians and not Marines. Instead, Dragon was actually seeing what became of the people he and his platoon had rounded up, something that the other Marines didn't have to experience or witness, which serves as the catalyst to his further radicalization. There is just no way a person could ever go back to blindly following orders after something like this. At least not anyone with any sort of conscience. Back on the Marine ship, it was assumed by a commanding officer that the entire platoon had been collected for their departure. And although he confirmed as much, Dragon's commanding officer actually didn't know where he went. He feared that the kid may have involved himself in what is happening on the island. Just imagine how different the timeline would be if this guy kept a closer eye on his platoon. At the very least, Shanks would be a Celestial Dragon, and there would be no Revolutionary Army. Hell, Dragon might still be a Marine, and Luffy would have a present dad in his life. Later, Dragon happened upon a Celestial Dragon who had just discovered Kuma. This was in the midst of Iba's declaration about the impossibility of surviving the game and the need for their escape. Dragon was amazed to see that these kids still had hope, which we saw in the previous chapter also caught Kuma's eye, which is to say that just being a big-headed loudmouth with hope for the future can actually change the world. The Wicked Celestial was celebrating in advance, since this would be a 10-kill streak for his precious rifle. He set his sights on Kuma's heart, and a shot was fired. But Dragon's gun was the one that was smoking. He used a tranquilizer on a Celestial Dragon. By harming one of them, Dragon just committed an unforgivable sin against the world government, and he did it to save the lives of some innocent strangers. Another decision that shifted the course of history in tremendous ways. And remember that this entire event is being broadcasted over in the Holy Land for other Celestials to see. This guy in particular was on a double-digit streak and was about to hit the jackpot. So just imagine how outraged they would be over a Marine not only getting involved in the game, but even compromising a Celestial Dragon. And that's disregarding the fact that he plans on taking 2 of their infants. But even so, Dragon was just one man. So plenty of unfortunate souls weren't so lucky and fell prey to the hunt. Later, a sudden explosion off the East Coast shook things up. An angry Celestial demanded to know what was going on. It turns out that the Rock's pirates were swarming onto God Valley with several other large ships in tow. Fully assembled, Rox reminded his crew that aside from Shaki, there were plenty of treasure and devil fruits up for grabs here. With that in mind, he saw no point in fighting amongst themselves for the time being. He wanted them to grab everything they could, and divide the loot when they get back to Pirate Island. Which is pretty much how I handled trick-or-treating with friends when I was a kid. And here, Kyo and Shiki were definitely bickering like children. But they weren't the only ones. Barbell pointed out that they can't exactly share Shaki like the rest of the treasure. Shiki was confident that Shakuyaku would fall in love with whoever saves her. Kyo agreed and was prepared to win her over. But John believed that Shaki would fall in love with whoever collected the most treasure. Whitebeard made it clear that he's not like the others, and was only saving Shaki as a friend. Although, if she just so happened to fall in love with him because of it, he wouldn't really mind. So Whitebeard is officially a tsundere. Stussy was outraged by his interest in another woman. Gloriosa thought that saving Shaki might just earn her Roger's gratitude. Strusen figured that since Ochoku didn't leave Hachinosu, he would probably be banned from Shaki's bar. But that's also assuming that things would go back to normal after all of this. And of course Ochoku didn't tag along since he's the whole reason Shaki was kidnapped in the first place. Big Mom called them all a bunch of fools for actually believing that Shaki would pay attention to any of them under any circumstances. While Kaido was more interested in making sure Big Mom would save him a rare devil fruit. The Marines surrounding the island quickly intercepted the pirates with cannon fire. Unfortunately for them, Rox was in a bit of a hurry and decided to just ram into them. The Navy was in a total panic. Rox was playing his role as a bloodthirsty and greedy pirate, while inside, I'm sure he was only thinking about the safety of his family. While the ship made its destructive arrival, Rox was the first to leap into action. The Marines were no match. And this is where the events of chapter 1096 picked up from. There, Whitebeard went on to complain about Rox running off before they could confirm Shaki's location and losing sight of their main goal, which we now know is a goal that he never shared. Back then, I had the false impression that Gloriosa was also interested in Whitebeard like Stussy. But the reason Stussy called out her hypocrisy was because Gloriosa futilely expected to beat Shaki in a battle of attraction too. Kaido also had a bone to pick with Roger, so we might just see him be embarrassed by the future king of the pirate tier. And with the arrival of pirates, the Celestial Dragons were in an uproar. They quickly began blaming the Marines and threatening them with capital punishment. And while they were busy discussing even more danger on the west coast, Dragon was securing Shanks and Shamrock. He closed his eyes and ran with them as the Roger pirates made landfall. Looking at the two babies, he was amazed to see that neither of them were crying, even in such a dire situation. So shout out to Conqueror's Haki, I guess. And interestingly enough, these two panels are somewhat reminiscent of Nami's backstory, where Belmare, a former Marine, carried and saved the lives of Nami and Nojiko. And despite the horrific circumstances at the time, baby Nami still managed to smile. So let me know if you think this is just a coincidence or there's actually some sort of unexpected link between Nami and Shanks. With the location under siege, at least by pirates this time, The celestial dragons were moved to the center of the island for their safety, and by extension, the safety of anyone who would be punished if they happened to be harmed. For the complicit Marines, between Rox and Roger, it was as if karma had come for them immediately. Roger rushed onto the scene with his crew in tow. He announced that he was here to save Shaki. Roger also suggested that since none of his crew had any hope of courting Shaki, they should just focus on stealing some treasure. To that, they just laid him out flat and charged on ahead. At this point in time, the Roger pirates were really just a bunch of overpowered goofballs. Also, shout out to Luffy for actually wearing his hat and not just using it as a back bling like Roger. Now, among the Roger pirates, there's a guy who looks an awful lot like Douglas Bullet. But although that guy did eventually become a member of the crew, the timing simply doesn't line up. The Demon Heir would have been a little kid back then. Instead, this is actually just a better look at a guy named Rangram. But thanks to the pirate invasion, Garling figured that their little game was over. Now his fellow Celestials were yelling at him to do something about the situation. And that is when the Knights assembled. Garling ordered the Marines to pull back and focus on protecting the Celestial Dragons. And here we have two new faces. One of them seems to look like a sort of demon yeti. Another one was tall, had two-tone hair, shades, horns, sharp teeth, a cigar, and was wearing a fur pelt, which is a pretty elaborate design. But she immediately reminded me of Dellinger from the Don Quixote Pirates. Even now, we still have no idea how or why Doflamingo adopted Dellinger as an infant. Even a young Law had to jump through several hoops just to join the crew. But considering his own celestial origins, it would certainly make sense for Doflamingo to take an interest in the son of one of the knights. Dellinger also happens to wear high heels. This could easily just be his fashion sense, or maybe they're a memento of his late mother. We also have a better look at a female member of the Knights with dark hair. Again, there is a flower in it, and we can even see her weapon of choice. Although, in the anime, her hair seemed to simply be blonde. The round-faced member of the Man-Mare family appears to be the marksman of the group. The guy with the bull skull over his head happens to wield a scythe, which is always cool to see in anime and manga. In the present, Dragon anticipates the Revolution's true battle to begin once the Knights make their move, so presumably he was able to see them in action here. War had officially broken out on the island, and with so many fronts being attacked at once, even with the Knights on their side, the Marines still expected to be wiped out. The strongest pirates in the world were cutting them down left and right, and they didn't even know what the scoundrels were after. But that's when a distant voice called out with a cannonball in hand. The man flung it like a missile across the sea. He wasn't about to let his men be cut down left and right. The fallout from the projectile consumed plenty of the pirates. Although, I'm not sure how he could avoid friendly fire with an attack like that. Both Rox and Roger turned towards the source. Rox with a look of frustration, since the guy would be getting in the way of him saving his family, while Roger was focused because the Tom to his Jerry was finally here to play. The Marines all recognized the famous ship with a dog figurehead. Vice Admiral Garp had arrived with his fleet as reinforcements. The many members of the Navy began celebrating and crying tears of joy. And like Rox's crew expected from Shaki, some of them even seemed to fall for their apparent savior. And with that, the legends of this legendary incident have all assembled. And remember, it is thanks to this event that Garp became known as the hero of the Marines. The trajectory of Garp and Dragon's lives veered into opposite extremes because of this. So while we may not have the satisfaction of seeing these celestial dragons be punished for these atrocities, I take a bit of solace in knowing that it ultimately screws them over for decades to come. If it wasn't for all this, Luffy would have just been a Marine, and they might not have to worry about all this Joy Boy stuff. And presumably, this was the last time such an event occurred. Dragon is finally getting the respect he deserves, while the Garp slander continues to rise. I seriously wonder what Oda wants us to think about Luffy's grandpa at this point. We have Dragon crying and nearly throwing up over crimes against humanity here. while his dad has the biggest smile in the world because he gets to throw hands with his buddy Roger. All the while knowing that the Celestial Dragons are on a genocidal expedition that he refers to as a little field trip. So yeah, in this case at least, I totally understand the anti-Garp agenda. Let me know if you're in the same boat. As always, I'm Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.